The iron door to the forgotten wing clanged shut behind her like a coffin lid. Nova Reyes, 24 hours into her first graveyard shift, stood alone in a corridor that hadn't seen fresh paint since Nixon was president. The air tasted of rust, bleach, and something metallic that clung to the back of the throat. Only one red bulb glowed above the control station, bathing everything in bloodlight. Every other cell in Block 13 was empty doors welded open, bunks stripped, graffiti bleached away. Every cell except one. Cell 13 at the very end. The inmate inside had been there longer than the prison itself had been maximum security. Prisoner, 478, Benjamin Harlow, age 91. Crime treason, 1959. Sentence, death, commuted to life when the state quietly stopped executing people. No visitors in 64 years, no mail, no phone calls, just a man everyone assumed had already died decades ago. Nova's boots echoed too loud as she made her first walk. The other guards called this shift babysitting the ghost. They joked that 478 never spoke, never moved, just sat on his cot staring at the same crack in the wall. They said if you looked into his eyes too long, you'd see your own death date. Nova didn't believe in ghosts, but her pulse hammered anyway. She reached the final cell. The old man was already standing at the bars. He was smaller than the file photo's frail, shoulders curved like broken wings, prison grays hanging off bone, but his eyes were alive. Pale blue, sharp as winter steel, fixed on her like he'd been waiting his entire life for this exact second. A thin white beard covered the lower half of his face, but it couldn't hide the smile that started slow and spread wide. "Officer Reyes," he said, voice soft as falling ash, yet carrying clear to the end of the hall. "You are early." Nova froze. Inmates weren't supposed to know guards' names until roll call. She hadn't even introduced herself. He lifted one trembling hand through the bars. Pinched between skeletal fingers was a folded square of yellowed prison notepaper, creased so many times it looked soft as cloth. "One favor," he whispered. "Before they remember, I am still breathing and fix that mistake next Friday." His fingers opened. The note fluttered to the floor just inside her side of the bars. Nova stared at it, heart kicking hard enough to hurt. Every rule screamed not to touch it. Contraband, disciplinary write-up, maybe worse. But the corridor lights flickered once, brief, deliberate, and the red bulb overhead dimmed until the only light came from the old man's eyes. She crouched, picked up the paper, unfolded it under the weak glow. Single line, written in faded pencil. "Bring me one red rose before the needle finds my vein." Below the words, someone had drawn a tiny perfect rose, so detailed the petals looked wet. Nova looked up. Harlow hadn't even moved. His smile was gone, replaced by something raw and pleading and ancient. "I've waited 64 years to ask," he said. "I want to tell sorry." "Ask again." Footsteps echoed far behind her Sergeant Malloy doing his hourly check. Nova folded the note fast, slipped it into her pocket where it burned like a coal. Malloy's flashlight swept the corridor, paused on her, moved on. When the footsteps faded, she was alone again, with the ghost who somehow knew her name. Harlow pressed his forehead to the bars. "One rose," he repeated, voice cracking for the first time. "That's all I need from the world before it takes the rest." The red bulb flickered again longer this time, then steadied. Somewhere deep in the prison, a transformer hummed once, low and hungry, like something waking up. Nova swallowed. "If I get caught, you one tea." He cut in, gentle but certain. The cameras in this wing died the same year Kennedy did, and the men who watch them are afraid to come down here after dark. He stepped back from the bars, melting into shadow until only his eyes remained two pale stars in a dead galaxy. "One rose," he whispered one last time. "And I'll give you the reason the lights in this prison have never gone out. even when the whole city did. The red bulb pulsed once, bright as a heartbeat, then dimmed to its usual corpse glow. Nova stood rooted, the folded note searing through fabric and skin, the smell of rust and bleach suddenly mixed with something else, something green, living, impossible. Far away, the prison clock struck midnight. She turned and walked back down the corridor, boots silent now, the weight of a single red rose already growing in her pocket like a promise or a curse. Behind her, in the darkness of cell 13, Benjamin Harlow smiled at the crack in the wall he had stared at for 64 years and began to count the hours until the girl came back. Nova's shift ended at 6 a.m., but she didn't leave the parking lot. She sat in her beat-up Civic with the engine off, windows fogging, staring at the folded note until the pencil rose looked ready to bleed. One red rose, contraband, career suicide, maybe jail time. Yet the old man's eyes, those winter steel eyes that somehow knew her name, wouldn't it let her drive away. She hit the 24-hour grocery at dawn, heart hammering while she picked the darkest, freshest rose in the bucket. The clerk raised an eyebrow at the prison badge still clipped to her belt, but said nothing. Nova wrapped the stem in wet paper towels, slid it down the inside of her boot, and prayed the metal detectors were as broken as the cameras in Block 13. Midnight came again. The forgotten wing smelled colder tonight, like the air itself was holding its breath. The red bulb flickered the moment she crossed the threshold, as if greeting her. Cell 13's bars gleamed wet under the weak light, and Benjamin Harlow was already waiting, standing straighter than any 91-year-old should. Nova stopped 1 foot from the bars. The rose pressed against her ankle like a heartbeat. "You came," he said, voice soft with wonder, like she was the miracle, not the flower. She pulled the rose from her boot, thorns still intact, and slid it through the bars. Harlow took it with both hands the way a drowning man grabs a rope. He brought it to his face, breathed deep, eyes closing as tears cut clean tracks through the prison grime. "Thank you," he whispered. 64 years without color." He tucked the rose behind his ear like a teenager, then reached under his thin mattress and drew out a sliver of sharpened plastic homemade stylus and a torn scrap of bedsheet. On it, he scratched fast, letters tiny and perfect. First riddle. He folded the cloth, slid it through the bars. Nova unfolded it under the red bulb. "I have cities but no houses, forests but no trees, rivers but no water. What am I?" She frowned. "A map." Harlow's smile split wide. He turned, pressed both palms to the cinder block wall behind his cot, and pushed. A section no wider than a paperback slid inward, with a soft click, revealing a shallow cavity. Inside, dozens of similar scraps, edges curled, covered in microscopic writing coordinates, chemical formulas, dates, and taped to the bottom, a tiny brass key no longer than a matchstick. He took the key, reached up to the rusted sink bolted high on the wall, and inserted it into a hairline crack no one would ever notice. A faint click. The entire sink swung out like a cabinet door, revealing a hollow space behind the pipes. Harlow pulled out a rolled sheet of yellowed graph paper, flattened it on his cot. It was a blueprint hand-drawn, labeled Prometheus Core, 1958. A sphere wrapped in copper coils, annotations in the same neat hand, 0-point resonance, infinite yield, suppressed, Nova-S breath caught. She'd seen declassified Cold War files and training whispers of a project that vanished overnight. Everyone assumed failure. Harlow tapped the paper. "They called it treason when I refused to weaponize it. Easier to bury a man than a miracle." He folded the blueprint, slid it back, closed the sink, locked the wall. Then he wrote on a fresh scrap and handed it over. "Second riddle. Bring the answer tomorrow. Same time. I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with the wind. What am I?" Nova stared at the cloth. An echo. Harlow's eyes sparkled. Good girl. He sat on the cot, cradling the red rose against his chest like a child. The bulb overhead brightened for a single heartbeat, almost proud. One more thing, he said, voice dropping to a thread. They moved my date up. 3 days now, not a week. Nova's stomach dropped through the floor. 3 days? He nodded once. They remembered I am still breathing. Bring the answer tomorrow, Nova Reyes. And I'll show you why the lights in this tomb have never once gone out, even when the whole city did. The red bulb pulsed again longer this time, then settled into a steady glow, as if the prison itself was listening. Nova backed away, the new riddle burning in her fist, the scent of the rose still clinging to the air between them. Behind the bars, Benjamin Harlow lay down on his cot, red flower bright against gray fabric, and closed his eyes with the first peaceful smile he'd worn in 64 years. The corridor lights dimmed to blood again as she left, but somewhere deep below, something electric stirred just once, like a sleeping giant turning over in its grave. Nova's hands shook so hard she almost dropped the duty keys twice on her way back to Block 13 the next night. 3 days, 72 hours until they strapped a 91-year-old man to a gurney and erased him forever. The second riddle in echo had kept her awake all day, burning behind her eyes like the red bulb that now seemed to pulse in greeting every time she crossed the threshold. Harlow was already at the bars, thinner, grayer, but standing tall like a soldier waiting for orders. The red rose lay on his cot, petals still perfect, as if time itself had paused inside the cell. He didn't speak, just lifted one finger to his lips and pointed to the floor. Nova crouched. Under the lowest bar, a fresh scrap waited. Third riddle. Last one. Solve it tonight. I am always hungry. I must always be fed. The finger I touch will soon turn red. What am I? She didn't hesitate. Fire. Harlow's smile cracked wide enough to show the young man he once was. He turned, pressed both palms to the same hidden panel in the wall, and pushed. The cinder block slid aside with a grinding sigh. This time he didn't stop at the sink. He reached deeper, fingers finding a second catch. A larger section of wall 2 feet wide swung inward on concealed hinges, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel lit by a single bare bulb that hadn't worked since the 70s. Yet it glowed now, steady and blue-white. Harlow took the red rose from his cot, tucked it behind Nova's ear like a promise, and motioned her forward. She stepped into the tunnel. The air changed cooler, metallic, alive. The walls sealed behind them with a soft thud. They were alone beneath the prison, boots echoing on rusted grates. Harlow moved fast for a dying man, Kane tapping out a rhythm only he could hear. 50 yards in, the tunnel widened into a forgotten vault, concrete walls sweating, floor littered with broken pipes and decades of dust. In the center stood a steel door the size of a bank vault, painted institutional green, a keypad long dead beside it. Harlow lifted the tiny brass key from the sink cavity. He had carried it in his palm the whole way and inserted it into a hairline seam no keypad could hide. The door unlocked with a pneumatic hiss. Inside waited the impossible. A sphere the size of a basketball hovered 3 feet off the ground, suspended in a cradle of copper coils thick as her wrist. It glowed soft blue-white, turning slow, silent, perfect. Light poured from it in gentle waves, no heat, no sound, just pure, endless energy. Cables snaked from the cradle into the walls, feeding the entire prison above. A dusty plaque on the cradle read, Prometheus Core Prototype 01-1958, Dr. B. Harlow. Harlow placed one trembling hand on the sphere. It brightened at his touch, recognizing its maker after 64 years. They buried me alive to bury this, he rasped, called it treason when I refused to let them weaponize it. Easier to kill the inventor than the idea. File boxes line the walls. Thousands of pages, photographs, reel-to-reel tapes labeled confidential. Nova opened one at random. Orders signed by generals and oil executives, 1959, authorizing permanent containment of subject and device. Another box held newspaper clippings Harlow declared insane, disappeared, presumed dead. A third contained the original death warrant dated last week, freshly signed. Execution moved up after satellite imaging detected unexplained power signatures beneath the prison. Harlow pulled a small reel-to-reel from his pocket recorded decades ago on smuggled tape and pressed it into her hand. My full confession. Coordinates. Proof. When they come for me, you'll already be gone. Take the core. Light the world. Nova S. eyes burned. I can to just you already did, he cut in, voice fierce. You brought the rose. You solved the riddles. You're the echo I've been waiting for. He reached into the cradle and lifted a single copper coil, etched with a tiny rose the master control. The sphere dimmed to a heartbeat glow. 3 days became one, he said. They're coming at dawn tomorrow. Go now. Out the service hatch behind the generator. It leads to the river. Take everything. He pressed the coil into her palm, closed her fingers over it, and kissed her knuckles like a knight-swearing fealty. Nova wanted to argue, to scream, to drag him with her. Instead, she memorized his face, every line, every scar, the red rose still tucked behind her ear, and backed away. The vault door sealed between them with a final hiss. She ran. Through the tunnel, up rusted ladders, out the hatch, into freezing night air, thick with river mist. She clutched the coil, the tapes, the files stuffed into her uniform. Behind her, deep underground, the Prometheus core pulsed once strong, defiant like a promise kept across decades. At 3:33 a.m., every light in the prison blazed white for exactly 10 seconds, bright enough to be seen from the city 10 miles away. Then they dimmed again, waiting. Nova disappeared into the darkness along the riverbank, red rose bleeding petals in the wind, the weight of history burning in her pocket. In cell 13, Benjamin Harlow lay down on his cot, hands folded over the wilted rose Nova had brought him, and closed his eyes with the peace of a man who would finally pass the torch. The prison lights flickered once more, almost a wink, and settled into silence. Tomorrow, they will come for him. Tonight, the truth was already free. Nova never made it home. She reached the riverbank, boots soaked, lungs burning, when the burner phone in her pocket, Harlow's last gift, slipped to her with the coil lit up with a single text from an unknown number. Midnight, cell 13, one last visit, bring the rose. She stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Dawn was 4 hours away. That was when they would come with the gurney and the needle. She turned and ran back through the mist, the red rose still tucked behind her ear, petals bruised but holding. The service hatch was already open, as if the prison itself was letting her in. The forgotten wing greeted her with silence. No guards, no cameras, only the red bulb pulsing like a dying heart. Cell 13's door stood ajar. Harlow sat on the edge of his cot, prison grays swapped for the same white shirt and tie he'd worn in 1959 trial photos. Press, somehow, dignified. The wilted rose lay across his lap like a medal. He looked 20 years younger, or maybe death had simply decided to be kind. You came back, he said, voice clear, strong. Good. Nova stepped inside. The bars didn't close behind her. He held out both hands. She took them warm, steady, alive. I lied. He smiled. They are not coming at dawn. They are coming now. Distant boots echoed fast, heavy, at least a dozen. Orders barked. Flashlights sliced the corridor. Harlow squeezed her fingers. Record me everything, then run. She pulled the burner, hit record, aimed it at his face. He spoke straight to the lens. No tremor, no fear. My name is Dr. Benjamin Elias Harlow. In 1958, I built the Prometheus core clean, limitless energy from quantum vacuum resonance. The government and oil cartels framed me for treason to bury it. Prisoner 478 was their coffin. Tonight, they finish the job, but the core is free. Officer Nova Reyes has it, the proof, the future. Let history judge who the real criminals were. He reached into his pocket, drew out a final object, a copper key shaped like a tiny rose, and pressed it into her palm. Master key, turns any lock in this tomb. When I am gone, walk out the front gate. They want to stop you. The Corps will speak for me. Boots rounded the corner. Black-clad tactical team, rifles raised, faces hidden behind visors. A man in a suit federal badge gleaming stepped forward. Step away from the prisoner, Officer Reyes. That is an order. Harlow stood slow, deliberate, and placed himself between Nova and the rifles. Shoot me if you have to, he called, voice ringing down the corridor. But the world already knows. He turned, kissed Nova's forehead like a father saying goodbye, and whispered against her skin, "Live loud, kid." Then he sat back on the cot, folded his hands over the wilted rose, and closed his eyes. The tactical leader raised a hand. Stand down! Lethal injection team is 2 minutes out. Harlow's lips moved one silent word only Nova could read. Now. She backed out of the cell, key biting into her palm. The team surged forward, zip ties and restraints ready. Nova ran. Corridors blurred. She jammed the rose-shaped key into every rusted gate. Each one swung open like it had been waiting 64 years for her touch. Alarms screamed, but the lights stayed steady, no lockdown, no flashing red, just the calm glow of a prison that had chosen whose side it was on. She burst through the staff entrance into the yard as the first pale edge of dawn touched the sky. Behind her, deep in cell 13, Benjamin Harlow took one final breath. At that exact second, the Prometheus core hidden beneath the riverbank where she'd stashed it flared to life. Every light in the entire complex detonated into pure white fire. Floodlights, cells, guard towers, even the electric fence blazed like the sun had fallen to earth. For 10 full seconds, the prison became a lighthouse. Inmates in other wings woke screaming at the sudden day. Tactical radios exploded with static. The injection team dropped their tray. Needles scattered across the floor. Then the light dimmed to a gentle, steady glow. Harlow was gone. Nova stood in the yard, rose petals drifting from her hair, copper key warm in her fist, burner phone already uploading the confession to every major outlet on the planet. Sirens wailed in the distance, news helicopters, federal cars, the whole world coming to see what one old prisoner and one young guard had just done to history. She looked back at cell 13 one last time. The red bulb above the door pulsed once soft, grateful, then went dark forever. Nova walked out the front gate as the sun rose, red rose still tucked behind her ear, and never looked back. The prison lights stayed on free, endless, defiant, long after the man who built them was pronounced dead at 5:47 a.m. The video hit the internet at 6:03 a.m. By 6:17, it was on every screen in the country. By 7, the prison was surrounded by news helicopters, protesters, and satellite trucks. By noon, the White House press secretary was sweating through his suit on live television, trying to explain why a 91-year-old scientist had just been murdered for inventing free energy. Nova never hid. She stood on the prison steps in her uniform, red rose still tucked behind her ear, copper key raised high, and played Harlow's full confession on loop from the burner phone while cameras rolled. The Prometheus core sat beside her on a concrete bench, glowing soft and steady, powering the microphone, the lights, the phones of everyone watching. When federal agents tried to push through the crowd, the sphere pulsed once gentle, warning, and every drone overhead lost signal and drifted harmlessly to the grass. The agents backed away. By nightfall, the story was global. Oil stocks crashed, power companies issued frantic denials, hashtags exploded, Free Harlow Prometheus Core let there be light, students poured into streets, grandmothers held candles outside the prison gates, someone started leaving red roses. By morning, there were thousands. By the second morning, 1 million. Day 3 brought the pardon. The president, cornered, exhausted, voice cracking on national television, signed a full posthumous pardon for Dr. Benjamin Elias Harlow, apologized to his memory, and ordered every classified file on Project Prometheus declassified by sundown. The warden was arrested in the prison parking lot. The tactical team commander turned state S evidence before breakfast. Day 4 brought the miracle. Nova carried the original Prometheus core into the Capitol herself. No security, no escort, just the sphere floating 3 feet above her open palms, like it trusted her completely. She walked through metal detectors that never beeped, past senators who forgot to breathe, and set it on the House floor. One flick of the copper rose key, and every light in Washington, D.C. blazed white for 10 perfect seconds. Then the grid went quiet. No brownouts, no bills. Just free, endless light. Within a year, the world changed. Old power plants were dismantled for scrap. New cores built from Harlow-S open-source blueprints rolled off assembly lines in Detroit, Sao Paulo, Nairobi, Seoul. Villages that had never seen electricity lit up like Christmas. Hospitals ran without generators. Children in refugee camps charged tablets under glowing copper roses. Oil tankers sat rusting in harbors. Billionaires became yesterday's news. Nova never took a dime. She turned the prison into the Harlow Free Energy Museum. Cell 13 became a shrine cot preserved exactly as Harlow left it. Red rose replaced fresh every day by visitors who lined up around the block. The death chamber was demolished. Wild red roses now grow where the gurney once stood. The forgotten wing became classrooms where kids from every continent learn physics by building their own pocket cores. 10 years later, on the anniversary of the night Nova brought one red rose, the museum courtyard overflowed. Nova 34 now, hair threaded silver from stress and joy, stood on the steps in a simple white dress, the original copper rose key on a ribbon around her neck. Beside her stood her husband, the journalist who first broke the story, and their 2 daughters, both wearing tiny red roses behind their ears. The president, a new one younger, elected on a platform of light, handed her the nation's highest civilian honor. Nova accepted it with a laugh, pinned it on the bronze statue behind her instead. Harlow at 35 smiling, arms open, red rose in his lapel, the Prometheus core glowing eternal above his head. She stepped to the microphone. 10 years ago, an old prisoner asked a young guard for one last favor, she said, voice carrying over a crowd that stretched to the horizon. He didn't ask for freedom. He asked for a flower, because he knew beauty outlives chains. She raised the copper key. Today, every child on earth falls asleep under light he gave them. Every hospital runs on power he was killed for. Every red rose you see blooming wild on these walls is his thank you note. The crowd roared. Children released 1 million red paper roses into the sky. They caught the wind and drifted like slow-motion fireworks. Nova turned to the statue, touched the bronze cheek the way she once touched the real one, and whispered so only the wind could hear. "You're free now, old man." The original Prometheus core, still floating in its cradle inside the museum, pulsed once, bright and warm, bathing the entire courtyard in living light. Every core on the planet answered in perfect unison. For 10 perfect seconds, the world blazed white, as if the sun itself had decided to celebrate. Then the light softened to its usual gentle glow, and the museum courtyard filled with laughter, music, and the scent of 1 million red roses. Nova took her daughter's hands, walked back through the gates that would never close again, and left the past where it belonged, buried under flowers, forgiven by light, and finally free. The prison that once swallowed a genius now feeds the world. And every year on the anniversary, when the red roses bloom thickest, people swear they see an old man in a white shirt and tie walking the courtyard at midnight, smiling at children who will never know darkness. He never speaks. He just touches the nearest rose, nods once toward the guard tower where a young woman once stood, and fades into the light he waited 64 years to give away.